All right, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself first of all. I want to thank Jorgen. He's the guy that invited me down here. And I'm actually doing 3 presentations for this particular meeting. And if you don't understand my accent, please ask again. I'll try and talk somewhat in English, I guess. So he asked me to come down here, and one of the things he was interested in me talking about was sheep, which I know nothing about, so you may have picked the wrong session. But I will tell you a little bit. And then he wanted me to talk about how we have transferred from me, the old guy, to the next generation. Now, I'm not going to get a whole lot into specifics about that because Canadian laws and tax implications are totally different than U.S. So I'll tell you in general terms how it worked, but as far as the specifics, there's no point in me going into what Revenue Canada does versus IRS and all those things. So anyway, I've been on the farm now. This is my 46th year, I think, of farming. And it's a 105-year-old farm. My grandfather was the first farmer on that particular piece of property. So we've been there for a little while. About a dozen years ago, we were going along. My wife has always worked off the farm, and we were getting close to thinking, well, maybe a few more years and we'll sell the farm and go and put our feet up at the lake and be done. And our children, who'd all been sent off to various higher places of learning, we kind of thought they were all professionals, they were going to be good, and come on in. And they decided one day, our oldest son came back and said he'd like to try farming. So that kind of puts things into a total different perspective. So we said, sure, let's do that. Let's give it a whirl, see what happens. So I knew enough along the way. One of the things that in my learning along the way, I got exposed to the concepts of holistic management. And then as I got a little further along, I decided to become an educator of holistic management. So part of that is helping people through things. So I'd had some experience with succession planning with other people, helping them through it. But it's quite a lot different when you get to do it yourself. Very different. So it's quite a challenge. So anyway, along the way of all this, I'll probably get this all mixed up, but that's okay. We'll eventually get to the end of the presentation, and hopefully I've covered everything I wanted to say. But it's still not done yet. We've been at it 12 years, so don't think this is going to be something that goes like that. It doesn't go that way. It's a long, slow process, but it's something that every person needs to work on. And my advice would be start early. You know, we talk about the whole name of this conference, and just about every presentation I've been to and read about, you know, we're talking about resilience. And part of resilience is people also. We need to be planning for that next generation, whether it's our own personal families or whether it's somebody from out of the area that's going to come in and be an intern, maybe eventually have ownership. You know, how it works, I'm not sure. But we need to always be thinking about that, because we accumulate. When you get to be my age and been on the same piece of land for 40, 45 years in my case, we accumulate a tremendous amount of knowledge about how that land functions that needs to be transferred to someone else. If I just had a sale and sold it, walked away, that knowledge is done. 105 years of knowledge is the book closed. It's done, lost. And I don't know if that's really well, augurs well for society. So anyway, when my son came back, he came with a wife, and she was city-born in city Vancouver, never been on a farm in her life. And lo and behold, to move from a major metropolitan area to outer Hodunk, Saskatchewan, is a bit of a change. It's a long ways to a Walmart from where we live. But she's adapted extremely well, and I think now, if you asked her, she probably would never go back to urban life. So, you know, we tend to think that everybody wants to be in the city, but I don't believe that is so. So anyway, I'm going to talk about sheep for a few minutes. So the long and the short of the sheep thing is fathers and sons don't always agree on how things should be done. And I'll talk about that a little bit more here in a bit. But so it became evident. I was running cows, a cow-calf operation. The whole farm is grass. I was running cows. He tried that with me for a couple years. He tried direct marketing chickens. He learned very quickly he didn't like direct marketing. And so he was looking for something else. Tira was a little bit intimidated by cows, so they thought they'd try sheep. So they started off on sheep, and with just a few. And so I'll just show you a few pictures here of sheep as we go along. So that's just a recent picture of some of the sheep out on the range. This is a little earlier. He started out with hair sheep, Katahdins and Dorpers. He's moved away from that now. He's moving towards all wool sheep. One of the problems you run into if you want to scale up a sheep operation, it's very difficult to find a number of sheep of one type at any one place. I'm not sure about here, but in Canada, I think the average flock size is something like 25 nationally. You know, there's very few big sheep. Martin is running 400 ewes. This is just an earlier picture again, just moving sheep around and some of what the kind of country we live in. And those are all hair sheep, obviously. There's the action you want to see, two nice lambs and a mother that looks after them both. So we're kind of a big believer in our operation in making a profit. We think that's kind of important. And so we tend to use whatever is available and adapt it to make it work. So this was my grandfather's barn. So it's 100 years old, this barn. And it's been various things over its life. I had a seed plant in it at one time. My father before me had it into a hog barn. It was the old milking cow barn way back in my grandfather's day. And now it's a sheep shearing barn. And, you know, we've done very, very little to it, just a few pens here and there, and it works very well for shearing. One of the things you need to know if you're going in the sheep business, you're going in the shearing business. So you better figure out how that's going to work. We hire this particular gentleman here. He's sheared sheep his entire life. And you can set your stopwatch in the morning at 8 o'clock, and his first sheep will take him 2 minutes. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, you can check, and it will still be 2 minutes per sheep. He's not the fastest guy in the world, but he is steady. And he's done this for his entire life. In fact, for his vacation, he goes to New Zealand so he can shear in the winter so he doesn't lose his touch. But so it's very interesting working with him. He likes to stay with you, so you get nice stories at night about some of his experiences. And so he just stays with wherever he's shearing, all over Western Canada and New Zealand, and he's been basically all over the world shearing. So anyway, that's just kind of what it looks like. And then that's the wool packer packing the wool in there, and that's my son pushing wool into a packer, and you can see the bags up above there. And so that's kind of what it looks like on our operation. Again, as I said, we don't like to spend a lot of money, so these are cattle corrals. Put a few extra panels in there, and they work very well for sheep. Very, very low cost. If we're going to run cattle in there, we just pick all them up with a skid steer, and bingo, we can run cattle back in that same corral. So the key is to keep your costs down. You know, it's very easy. We as farmers have a bad habit of wanting to spend money. We tend to think we need to have all of the latest gadgets and stuff. And I believe if we want to truly be profitable, we really need to resist that particular urge. We need to just take our time and think about how we can adapt things, how we, you know, maybe it's not the fanciest looking place, but it works. So that's Tira there. She's, I think she was sorting ear tags in that particular picture. It looks like she was concentrating quite hard on something there anyway. But so it's, you know, they're very interesting animals to work with. You know, for little kids, they have 3 small boys. You know, very safe. You know, the kid might get run over, but he's not going to get killed, whereas a cow can kill young kids. Can kill me too, I guess, but, you know, so they're pretty safe animals to be around. And the other thing that you learn very quickly when you're in the sheep business, running them on grass, you're in the dog business. And so you need to be aware of that. and you need to like working with dogs. Because to manage dogs is a big deal. That's not as easy as you think. Because these dogs tend to like to chase coyotes, that's what they're there for. But sometimes the neighbors don't particularly appreciate these big white dogs running through their yard or their cow herd. So there gets to be some management issues between neighbors about how this works. You know, the dogs don't hurt the cows, they don't bother them one bit, but some neighbors get really torqued out of shape about that. So you know, you need to be aware that that can be issues, and he tries as best as he can to keep the dogs within our property, but dogs don't always want to stay. When they're chasing a coyote, they don't really care. They're going to go through that fence and keep going. And that's really what we want them to do. They don't usually, very rare will they ever kill a coyote, but they certainly will chase it. So, why sheep? Come on in. So, Jorgen invited Martin, my son, to come down here and do this presentation with me, and so I asked him if he wanted to come, and he said, no, I'm not going there to do that. So that's why I'm doing this part. He isn't much for standing up here doing these kind of things. So, when you do the gazintas, sheep are quite a bit more profitable on a per acre basis than cows are. And so if you just think about that, and think about how much grass they eat. Basically, five ewes are equal to one cow. So if you get 1.5 lambs, that's 7.5 lambs versus one calf at $200, you can soon see that, you know, it gets to be reasonably profitable fairly quickly. And as I said earlier, Tira didn't particularly care for the cows. She was intimidated by them. She's a small person. She's only, I don't know how tall she is, but somewhere up in there. And, you know, she just, you know, never being a city girl, born and raised, she didn't have any comfort at all being around cattle. So, you know, in this business, you should really like what you do. You should have passion for what you do. And if you don't like the animals you're working with, it's hard to get passionate about them. So they made the decision as a couple that sheep was the way to go. And so they started out quite small. I think they bought 30 or 40 hair sheep to begin with, and now, as I said, they're up to 400 ewes. So there is some advantage to having another animal on the land besides cows. Diversity is always good in an operation. Whether it's people, whether it's animals, whether it's plants, it doesn't matter. Diversity is a really good thing to have. Also, there's some synergy between cows and sheep, that you can actually graze cows and sheep together at various times and have some advantages. It does different things to the grass than just cows alone or sheep alone. So there can be some synergy by doing that. And as I said, you've got to like working with dogs, and Martin is very good with dogs. He has both border collies for herding and the big white ones for keeping the coyotes away. And another huge factor in sheep business, and I believe it's the same in the United States, is that in the beef business, what I'm in, we export an awful pile of beef, both to the United States and offshore. And we all know what happens in trade things, and various people get excited about different things, and we have little hiccups in trade deals. And all of a sudden, to absolutely zero, nothing to do with me, I just make my living doing this, all of a sudden somebody says, we don't want your beef today. And the price goes, boom, just like that. I'm out of business if it doesn't smarten up pretty quick. I had zero control over it, nothing to do with my management. That's just the way it is. That's what's happening in trade. Whereas in the sheep business, we are only 40%, we only produce 40% of our own lambs in Canada. The rest come out of New Zealand. So we don't get those kind of crazy trade disruptions. So you know, when you're thinking about being in business for a number of years, that's kind of an important thing to think about, is how your market can be impacted. And it can be impacted. In Canada, a few years ago, we we hit, well, I guess it's 15 years ago now, but we hit BSE, bovine spongiform encephalitis. And in one day, the price of cattle basically went to zero. And it stayed that way for about 1 year. Now that makes life really interesting. Your management gets really good when all of a sudden you have no income. So most of us that have been in the cattle business for more than 15 years, we learned a lot of really valuable lessons in that, what we call our BSE crisis in Canada. So, he runs lambs in the spring, or lambs in the spring on grass. Come on in if you want. Where? You just want to take my picture? Oh, okay. That's what you doing. You don't want me to look at you then, do you? So he runs. The sheep are out on the grass just as our cows are year round, 24 or 12 months of the year. They're out all the time. And so we start lambing, or he starts lambing about in that late April, early May. And that takes a wee bit of work because quite often lambs will have triplets, and triplets aren't that good. Well, they're good, but usually the ewe can't raise triplets. Or sometimes they'll have twins, and they have one, and then they walk away and have another one, and so they think they only had one. And so when you're out on a 10-acre paddock with 400 ewes running around and 200 or 300 or 400 lambs running around going buh, buh, to figure out who is who becomes a bit of work. And so he spends quite a lot of time out there through the lambing period trying to make sure that the one lamb that got left back here gets moved up so he's with his mom. And that sometimes he's not always right, but usually it works. He uses a thing called, I guess he calls them jugs, where he puts the ewe into a little box basically. Its head is held so it can't move. It can lift its head up and down, but it can't turn around and get back to its udder. So she can't kick away, or can't butt away the new lamb that he's grafting on, or the other one that she didn't think is hers. And so he'll take triplets, he'll take the one away from a triplet, put it on a good ewe that had a single, and he puts them in a jug for 1 day. Once they've been bonded for 1 day, 24 hours, the mother can't tell the difference. She can't tell which lamb was hers and which one was the other lamb's. So it works really well. But it just takes a lot of time observing your flock. Whereas I find with the cows, because they usually only have one, it's not nearly as big a deal. We can have the cows are calving on grass at the same time I walk through. Oh yeah, those 3 calved today. It's very, very rare that a cow will ever get mixed up with and get the wrong calf. It does happen, I've seen it, but it's very uncommon. So that part you need to be aware of when you start talking about sheep, that there is those differences. So he averages about 1.5 lambs per ewe. By the time, you do have death loss. Sheep like to die. You need to be aware of that too. But that's about what he averages. So if he has 400 ewes, he should ship 600 lambs. So generally in our conditions, we can pretty much have lambs ready for the fall market. Roughly is 100 pounds. We can have them ready by, November, early December, something like that. Just running them on grass. No artificial inputs whatsoever, no grain or anything like that. And in our part of the world, usually a 100-pound lamb is worth between $2 to $2.25 a pound. Is kind of the lamb price. So that gives you your $300 or so, a little bit over maybe for each ewe per year. You can buy a ewe in Canada for $300 quite easily. So your very first year, you've got your money of your ewe out. So that's not bad. You can't do that with a cow. You're going to pay $1,500 to $1,800 for a cow, and you might get $1,000 for a calf. So it takes you 2 years to get your money out just to pay for the cow. So that's one of the reasons I say sheep are more profitable. For young people looking to get into some kind of livestock, I would highly recommend you think about sheep. Fencing is an issue. We use electric wire, and on perimeter fences we use 5 wires. on internal moves. We move animals relatively quickly across the landscape every 2 or 3 days. And there he usually uses 3 wires, or sometimes he uses premier netting, just depending on what he's doing. Everybody familiar with electric net? Know what that is? Yes? Yeah, most of you are nodding. Okay. So that's what he'll use for his general moves along the way. The electric fence, can I write in this board here, I guess, maybe? So here we have a post in the ground. So he'll put a wire here, and he puts an electric wire there, another wire here, electric wire here, and then maybe one more wire there. So it'll be 2 hot on the one side, 3 cold on the other side. And the reason he does that is usually when you watch sheep, when they come along, they like to lift up. So they'll go to the bottom of a wire, they'll lift their head up like this, and then walk ahead under the wire. So that sheep comes along and lifts up to either go between the bottom one or between the first and the second one, lifts its head up into its exact. Whereas if all the wires were on the same side, it would lift it up with its head. The 2 cold ones, it wouldn't likely get a shock because it's so insulated. So you got to make sure you shock them on their nose or their mouth somewhere up front. And so they learn pretty quickly that these kind of fences are pretty hot, and don't play with them. So it works reasonably well. Once in a while you always get the odd ewe that acts up, but sometimes you have to have a fairly good culling program too, that when you have a ewe that's constantly out, that one goes to town. One-way ticket. Anybody have any questions about sheep? So when we first started, we had read some stuff about sheep and bonding and things like that. So we started with teaching the sheep that the cows were their savior. So you can see the sheep out there with the cows, and it worked not bad. But at that point in time, we didn't have very many sheep. We only had 30 or 40 sheep is all he had. And they did tend to stay with the cows for safety. And so the coyotes wouldn't come into the group of cows, and it worked not too bad. But as he began to get more sheep, that didn't work anymore. And so that's when he had to start going to dogs. But so if you're running some cows and sheep, a fairly small number, say 30 cows and 30 sheep, or 50 cows and 50 sheep, I think you could actually make this work. You know, it's a cheap way of keeping predators at bay to have. You know, so if a coyote comes along, they might all be grazing right over here in front, but what the sheep learn then, the cows don't give a damn, but the sheep learn that, hey, if a coyote's coming, they better run over there to those cows. And so they'll go right under the legs of the cows, basically. The cows, doesn't bother them any. And so when you start out doing this, you basically have to put the group of cows into a pen and throw the sheep in there with them so they all kind of get used to each other. Do that for 4 or 5 days until the cows are used to the sheep and the sheep are used to the cows, and then you let them go and hope it works. So it's something you can think about. It did work to some extent for us, but eventually we gave up on that particular plan. So what did he learn? He started with a small flock of Katahdin and Dorper sheep, and he still has a few out there, but I think as those ewes get to their end of their life, they will be going and not replaced. So basically he's working on wool sheep now. Martin is the kind of guy that he likes to wear all natural clothes, and that means wool. And so he's got very fascinated with wool quality. And so he's been working, attempting to breed wool up, to get sheep that are really good, high, fine micron count wool. So he's using Clun Forest, is his predominant ewe now. He has a dog's breakfast of a lot of other ones because he couldn't get enough Clun Forest. And then he's using Ile-de-France and Rambouillet rams is what he uses. They're both very fine wooled rams, trying to breed the quality of the wool up. And some of the fleeces, he's actually getting pretty good money on the fleece. Normally, in our part of the world, the wool, most people running sheep, wool is basically considered a nuisance. If you get enough money to pay the shearer, you're happy. That's what they think about wool. They get the shearer in. If they get $4 or $5 a fleece, that's basically what the shearer charges you, and they're happy with that. They broke even. Good. Whereas Martin doesn't think that way. He thinks that wool should maybe be worth $15 or $20 a fleece, and he's actually starting to get that on some of his better sheep. So I believe there is a market. You know, when you look at the world wool trade, Australia's always had the kind of the dibs with their merino sheep and really high count micron, or low, yeah, real fine wool anyway. But they're having issues over there between droughts and fires and a few things, and so their production is going down. And there is demand as people become more aware of what we're doing to our planet. People are looking for more natural solutions to clothing, to everything. And so there is quite a demand for good quality wool. So that's what he's been working on. Okay, any questions about sheep? Yeah, yes.
How do you guys navigate finding a market?
For the wool?
Yeah, do people come to you, or you guys have to go out and network?
Okay, in Canada, we have a Canadian wool cooperative. So the wool all goes to Brantford, Ontario, in great big bags, and it is graded there. Now you can do it privately. You don't have to belong to that, but that's what he's been doing so far, and I'd say 95% of the sheep producers in Canada belong to that particular outfit. So what they do then is it all comes into big warehouses. They grade the bags. They'll get 100,000 pounds of this quality wool. They'll fob it out on the world market, get whatever price. So whoever wants wool at this quality, we'll give them a bid if they like it, and then they in turn then will pay the growers back depending on how much they got for that particular grade of wool. So that's how it's done. It's a great big wool cooperative. So that's what he's marketed so far. The only other markets that I'm aware of are the very small local craft, and I know they've been talking to a couple of people, seeing if there's opportunities there, but to my knowledge, I think they've taken them samples of some of their better fleeces, but I don't think there's been a deal consummated yet that I'm aware of. Yes?
Is the meat enough for sheep in Canada? Is it regulated at all by code as some of the other things are?
No. No, there's no marketing boards for sheep. We have marketing boards for our poultry products and our milk, but everything else operates in the same system you do down here. Any other questions on sheep?
How about the winter time, very cold? Is it better than cows?
Actually, I would say sheep are tougher in the winter than cattle are. They have a coat called wool on them. They're shorter to the ground, so they don't get as cold. And sheep also have an interesting ability to paw. So they, you know, when in snow where you start to get snow this deep, sheep will actually dig through that and go right down. Whereas once a cow gets about to the depth of its eyes, it won't put its nose down any further. Some cows will move their nose this way a little bit to push snow to the side and then take a bite. But I find sheep are, you know, if you want to really push the envelope and graze in our cold conditions in January, I'd try sheep more than cattle. So, you know, in your conditions here, I think you could run sheep year-round out in the range here.
What range of temperatures is good for start of lambing? Like, does it need to be about 20 degrees?
He's starting in late April, which is a wee bit risky because we can get a wet snowstorm that time of year. Most years we won't, but probably once every 10 years you will. And if that happens, it's an absolute wreck because new lambs have virtually no thermal ability to survive. So one of the things that he does is he always fleeces before lambing. So the ewes get sheared before lambing, and the reason for that is you want the ewes to know it's cold. If she has a wool coat on like this, she is the least bit concerned about what the weather is. She doesn't know it's cold. Whereas if you take it off her, she's a little bit more aware. But so you have to almost have an old barn or cattle corrals or something where you can run that whole flock in if you're going to get real wet, ugly snow for 2 days, something like that. because you will have a massive wreck. All of the lambs that are a day or two old probably will not make it through a heavy wet snow. The cold itself won't bother them that much. It's getting wet and cold is what will get them. Anybody else? Yeah.
Are you parasite resistant?
No. But parasites, again, are a huge issue with sheep. One of the things that he works very hard at is moving. We move animals all the time, both cows and sheep. We are what we call planned grazing, so we're moving just about every day. And so the key is to watch where you've been. Most of these, the parasites of sheep, they come out the back end. It takes them about 21 days, I believe, most of them to go through their cycles. Then they climb up the leaf of a grass plant and wait for that sheep to come again and eat it. So as long as you're, say, 40 days, 50 days out, that guy's dead. So you've effectively broke the parasite cycle by your rotation of just where you moved your sheep. So that works reasonably well. But you always will have issues where there's going to be the odd chronic one that, you know, you may have to use a chemical insecticide, you know, something like Ivamec, or he uses apple cider vinegar quite a lot and attempts to use a more organic. We're not organic, but we attempt to be very close to organic. So we don't like synthetic insecticides and stuff like that. It's not very good for our dung beetle populations. Yes?
How do you alter your paddock, or do you alter your paddock rotation when it's winter and starts snowing? Do you just open it all up, or do you still move them in the same, sequence?
So when we get to winter, we tend to quit moving as much. We use, in the cattle, we use a concept what we call bale grazing, where we just park a bunch of bales in a paddock, let the cows eat them. With sheep, because he's working on fleece quality, he can't let the sheep eat a bale standing. Because what happens on a big or a round bale, the sheep kind of mushroom in. They can't eat all the way up the top of the bale, so they'll eat in like that. So here we have our bale. So in a couple of days, the sheep will have eaten it like this, and then that bale tips over. And sometimes if you're unlucky, you can't kill a sheep in that process. But usually what happens, so then the sheep are all rubbing in here, and so their fleeces become extremely dirty. And so when you're trying to sell high quality hay, or high quality fleece, that's not a good thing. So what he does is every few days he actually starts a tractor up and he takes hay out or straw out, whatever he's feeding, and he actually unrolls bales. So it'll take 2 or 3 days out, a feed out to that paddock and unroll it so they can all access it. He's just trying to keep his fleeces cleaner by doing that. Okay. All right, succession. All right. This is the fun part. So we need to have a profitable operation. If you aren't making any money, there's no point talking about succession, in my opinion. So whatever you can do today, tomorrow, next year, to start to get yourself to be profitable, then there's hope that maybe your son or daughter will come back to the farm. But if all they've heard over their entire life is you whined at the dinner table every night about how horrible farming was and what a stupid job and blah, 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 the damn banker, and that's kind of the attitude, why would you expect your son or daughter to want to farm? So a lot of it is our attitude. And I also believe that Henry Ford said, I think I can, or I think I can't. And he's right either way. And I think every one of us can be profitable, and quite profitable if we want to. One of the things that I believe is that I'm quite passionate about soil health, and I quite often will say that one of the biggest issues in soil health is compaction from tillage and various other things. But then I'll say the single biggest issue is usually the compaction, this distance right here. That's the biggest issue with most farmers, is that compaction between there. And it's the same thing with profit. Sometimes we have to change to be profitable. So there's one of the reasons that we're farmers is because we like to work with our hands. We're good at feeding cows, fixing fence, seeding, combining, hauling grain, whatever it is that we do, growing vegetables, whatever. We like doing that stuff. We like being outside. We're not scared to work 16 hours a day. Those are things that we value as farmers. We really like doing that kind of stuff. But those are what I call in jobs. We're working in the business. And every one of those jobs that I just described, I can hire somebody for $20 or $25 an hour, and within a week or so, I can probably have them do that job almost as good as I could. Probably in 2 weeks, they might even be doing it better in some cases. Okay? So I can hire all those jobs done. There's one job on my farm I can't hire out, and that's the thinking. That's working on the business. And a lot of us don't like working on the business. But that's where you make $1,000 an hour. It's when you sit down in your office and you do planning. You figure out what's going to happen next. How can you become more profitable? Look at my costs and analyze your business. So that is absolutely critical. You need to spend time. You need to set aside, depending on your habits, maybe it's an hour every morning for 5 days a week. Or maybe it's 2 mornings a week. Tuesday and Thursday, you spend 3 hours in the office. You need to teach yourself those kind of habits to work on the business. The in the part, that's always there. You can walk out the door anytime and work in the business anytime you want. But you cannot hire one single person to do the thinking for you. Your accountant, your lawyer, your financial advisor, whoever it is, they can't think for you. Once you do the thinking, you can go to them and say, what do you think? But they can't dream it up for you. You can't hire me to come and advise you. We might sit for 3 or 4 days, I get you figured out, I can throw out some ideas, but still, you're the guy that's got to make that decision. So, that's critical. We got to be profitable. And the other thing I would suggest is start early. Don't wait till you're 94, 1 foot's in the grave before you start. That's probably not the right time to start talking about succession. And I believe it's critical that your goals are aligned. That if you're going this way, and I'm going this way, I can guarantee at some point in the future it's not going to go well. And some of the biggest wrecks that I see is where we have a father, 2 sons come back farming. Everything is going along good. Both sons get married. And everything starts to go not quite as good. And of course, it's always the wife's fault, She's the problem, of course. But so after about 10 years of this, either there's a divorce and the wife will leave one son, or there's a major wreck and the whole thing blows apart. And those families get to the point where they don't even talk anymore. And those are horrible, horrible, horrible. And what happened when you go back and analyze it is they didn't all have the goal. They never sat down once or twice a year and actually talked about what we're trying to accomplish. And so if you want to start doing a succession plan with your son, daughter, whatever, whoever it is, it's critical that you figure out, this is what I truly believe, soil health, all these things are really important to me. I want you to farm in such a way that soil health is important to you too. And if my son said, oh heck, I'm going to be a big time chemical user, soil health, that's a bunch of stuff, that doesn't mean anything to me, probably we wouldn't get along very well. And probably it wouldn't work. So that's critical. The other thing that you need to be aware of is that equal and equitable are not the same. A lot of people have the idea, I got 3 kids, okay, each one of them is going to get $333,000. That's what they're going to get when I die. That's equal. That may not be equitable. So make sure you understand that. And communication. My son and I aren't good communicators. Some days we don't talk to each other, but yet our goals are very, very similar. And that's one of the reasons why he went into sheep and I stayed with cows, because we each kind of do our own thing, but yet we're trying to accomplish exactly the same thing. We believe in the same things on the land, but day-to-day operations, it's better maybe if he's going away, I'll look after his sheep or he'll look after my cows, but day-to-day it might be best if I just let him do his thing and he lets me do my thing. There's nothing wrong with that. That's just the way we are. Maybe not everybody's that way. Every person is different. but you need to recognize what your style is and how you can make it work. But you need to communicate. So I want to spend a minute or two here talking about profit. So how many of you learnt this? Everybody believe that? Yes? A few of you are nodding. Did you learn all that? Yeah? Oh, okay, good. I don't believe that. I believe this. Profit minus income equals expenses. So if you want to be profitable, you should believe this too. So let's just say I want to make $100,000 this year. That's my goal. So I'm going to sell $1 million worth of beef. So I take 1 million minus 100,000. That means my expenses can be no more than $900,000. So when I sit down and start doing my planning, I know that. Whereas if I go back to this one right here, okay, I got $1 million. I do all my planning. Oh, I got $987,000 worth of expenses. Boy, that gives me $23,000 worth of profit. That's totally different. On this one here, I'm being proactive. I'm saying I'm going to make $100,000. I set that right out in the very front, and then the expenses can get cut, so I achieve that goal. So teach yourself this formula and practice this formula. So this is how, when you take holistic management, this is how we teach you to do your financial plan. So this, if we're talking for a calendar year 2020, we'll say, you would likely do this in November or December of 19. So we start out at number 1 there with the net worth. So we add up all of our assets, all of the liabilities, what we owe, we subtract the difference, that's our net worth. That should be the number. If we called in the auctioneer, had a sale, and exited the business, that's the check we should walk away with. Okay? That's step 1. Step 2 then is I plan how much I'm going to sell. So I'm going to sell $1 million worth of beef this year. Okay? Know that. Step 3 is how much do I want to make? So I want to make $100,000, we'll say. So step 4 then is define the weak link in my operation. So if I'm going to be I'll just give you 2 examples. So I'm a cow producer. One link in my business is growing grass. The second link is eating grass, converting grass to beef. The third link is selling beef for cash. Okay? 3 parts of a business. If I'm an organic producer, I'm growing, say, small grains. The second step is harvesting and cleaning those small grains. The third part then will be to market those small grains for cash. Okay? So that's the 3 parts, the 3 links of my business. So what we want to do then is figure out which one of these am I the poorest at. Because a chain will only break at 1 link. So why would I try and fix every link? I want to just fix the one that's going to break. So then I go to step 5. Once I know that, and we'll say in my case, I'm not a very good grass grower. So I go up here to step 5 and I start looking at all my expenses from last year, and I'll say, okay, I got to fix my weak link. So nitrogen fertilizer would make me grow more grass. So that could be one way of fixing it. So that would be what I would call a wealth-generating expense. Putting up a couple of cross fences so I had better utilization of my grass could be a way of fixing my weak link. Okay? So I plan, I sort out all my expenses, and any that are going to fix my weak link I leave in, and then we always have some inescapable ones, payments and taxes and a few things like that. But everything else in that pile is called maintenance. All maintenance expenses can be cut, believe it or not. They can be. And so if I want to achieve my goal of making that $100,000, I'm going to have to likely start cutting expenses. So the reason we do this is that it changes. So let's just assume all of a sudden now my weak link is marketing my beef. Now, is nitrogen fertilizer a wealth-generating expense? Does it fix my weak link of marketing? No, it doesn't. So now it moves to maintenance. So it can change. And just because I fix my weak link this year, next year my weak link might change. It might be different. So this is an annual thing, and you would also do this for every single enterprise you have. So we do all that. Then we do our cash flow. You all know how to do that, I imagine. You do your January, February, etc. Get a total at the bottom, carry it forward to February, blah, blah, blah. all the way through till you get to December, and then you can do your ending net worth. You can project forward how much you're going to be worth at the end of 2020. So then you take that number and you go back to number 1 and you subtract, and did that equal number 3? 100,000. Did my net worth go up by that much? If it did, you go, woohoo! Let's go put the plan into effect. If it didn't, you take the plan and you rip it, you put it in file 13. Tomorrow, you sit down and you do it again. Now, because I would argue very strenuously that if you can't make it work on paper, why would you go and do it for real? And I have neighbors that I'll talk to them in the fall and they say, yeah, didn't make any money this year, Blain. And I'll say, well, what are you going to do different next year? Nothing. And so I'll talk to them again next fall. How did you make out? Oh, we didn't make any money again this year. My definition of insanity is continuing to do the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And it'll be the same. So we have to do stuff like that. We have to plan. This is a really powerful way of ensuring that you will be profitable. So once you're happy with that, then step 8. Remember I talked about that on the business stuff? Well, this is working on the business, but step 8 then is making sure that once a month that plan comes out of the desk drawer, goes up on either a computer, Excel spreadsheet, whatever you like to use, and you actually look at that plan and then you do your accounting and see, are we on track? If you aren't on track, you better get back on track. That's what we mean by control. So that's basically the process. So we have to be profitable if we're going to be successful in succession planning or in business generally. So the monitoring, we got to have the discipline to do this. That's hard for a lot of us, is to have that discipline. And we need to know what our goals are, and so that we're designing our financial plan so we're moving towards our goals. So how did we do it? So one of the nice things about having grandchildren this size is that they think you're pretty smart yet. I'm pretty sure in a few more years they won't be quite as keen on listening to Grandpa and Grandma. But anyway, so we have 4 of them. And they're 2 at 8, 1 at 5, and 1 at 3. So we had 3 children, Martin, Alan, and Kathleen. Martin and Tira are married and farming with us. And they have 3 sons there. Alan and his partner didn't make it, but he has half custody of his daughter Regan. And our daughter Kathleen has a partner, but she's a professional, and I don't know whether she'll ever have children, but that's not my worry. So that's our group. So when we started out in this, when Martin and Tira told us that they wanted to come back to the farm, one of the first things we did was we called a family meeting. And we actually went to a resort. We rented hotel rooms for everyone, and we had a retreat. And this is important that you do it this way, because it's really easy if you're having a serious meeting like this, all of a sudden you look out, oh, the cow is out. So guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to go out and chase the damn cow in. And the whole meeting then stops for a while. The flow, everything ceased. So it's important that you go away, a whole family, so you're not thinking about things like the cows. Throw your cell phone away. This is really important stuff. We need to focus on it. So we went away for the weekend, and we hired a facilitator to help us. I don't think this is something that you can do, me as the dad can't do with you as the kids. I don't think that works. I think we all have to be equal. We have to have someone else up here or working with us facilitating this. And so one of the questions that we asked is, anyone interested in the farm? We already knew Martin and Tira were, but we wanted to be sure that we weren't cutting out the other 2 if there was any interest. And so they had some soul searching. There was a few exercises they did to help them through their thinking. But we concluded after all that was done, that they were not interested in the farm. So that made our planning a little bit easier. So then the second thing that we did was that we told Martin and Tira, well, if you want to farm with us, one of our beliefs very strongly is that our whole land ethic, our financial planning, all came from holistic management. We want you 2 to go and take holistic management. And so they did that. And they bought into it very well, which that made things work really well for our goals to align. So that's basically where we got to with at the very beginning. Within the first year or two, we got all those things done. So then, in the last few years, Naomi and I started, as we started to get a little older, we thought, well, maybe we should start getting a little more serious about the actual doing of how we transfer. So we hired an expert again, and he did a plan with a complete liquidation. So he said, okay, we're going to call in the auctioneer, we're going to sell everything to the highest bidder. How much money are we going to have? And then he projected us out to live to 94 years old. How much money would we have every month? And we have quite a lot of confidence that we will have lots of money till 94 years old. So that's where we started at. Just for interest's sake, that right there is 1 year ago right now. I was probably standing there. This is on the island of Crete in southern Greece, and that is the oldest olive tree in the world. There's over 4,000 years old. So Martin and Tira have been farming with us now for 12 years, and we have no formal plan in place. We still don't to this very day. And that's probably a mistake. We should have pushed that a little bit harder. We were basically ready to do it about 3 years ago, and all of a sudden our daughter-in-law got quite serious colon cancer. So everything just kind of went, and that's life. Everything kind of went in, it wasn't very important anymore. But she did well, and she's okay again. But so over those 12 years, they used our land and facilities to grow their net worth. So they've gained value. So now, very recently, we purchased a retirement home. We've just moved off the farm to a home at the lake. So now, we're still going to have roughly $75,000 a year that we will have as annual income coming in. And what we're going to do is Martin and Tira are going to basically borrow enough money to pay for that house. And then we're going to, I'm not giving them the cows, but I'm going to let them use our cows to give us annual payments on calves. And for tax reasons, I want to continue to own the cows, and I might even pay the expenses on the cows for the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, just depending on where our incomes are at. There's some tax advantages to doing that way. But I will no longer be day-to-day management of the cows. They will do the cows, and if they get 30 calves a year, they will pay us those 30 calves a year, $30,000 for the rest of the farm. So that's kind of how we have it structured. So they're going to have to borrow some money to basic, so we don't have a mortgage on our house that we just bought. We just went and bought a house and signed my name on a. When you get to be old and have a little bit of money, it's easy to do that. So what will happen in the end here is that Martin and Tira will end up owning about $1.5 million operation for about 40 to 45% of its value, plus all of the years of sweat equity that they have put in. Alan and Kathleen will receive the retirement home plus any other assets that we still happen to have whenever we pass on. So that's kind of how we've set it up. I think it's a reasonably fair way. One of the second biggest wrecks I usually see are the people that had everything given to them. Those are the ones that they don't appreciate it, and within 10 years, it's gone. So, you know, the biggest problem we have in agriculture, in my mind, is the capitalization of it. Your land prices here are absolutely astronomical to what ours are, and I think ours are absolutely astronomical. But so by doing it this way, they're able to cash flow it. It's not going to be easy for them, but I don't think it's necessarily bad to struggle for a few years either. I think that it's character building. I've done it my entire life, and it didn't hurt me. You know, there's some days you get kind of tired of making payments, but you know, in the end, you end up owning it, and it's a good thing, I think. So, is this equal? No. If you look at the money, Martin and Tira get way more in the long run, because they're buying an asset at one heck of a lot less than the full cost of it. But they've also struggled, whereas these two here are both making big salaries and living reasonably well compared to what Martin and Tira are. So that is basically the presentation. So do you have any questions about succession planning or sheep? If you don't have any, we can quit. Yes, yes.
So I'm just wondering for your other children.
Yes.
So are you planning on leaving what you have left? What are your other children inheriting?
What will they inherit? Okay. One of the things I didn't mention is that we've been very fortunate. My wife has been a professional all our farming career, so she's always worked off. So she has a reasonably good government pension, which definitely helps. And we've also been profitable enough that we've been able to set aside a considerable amount of money into off-farm investments. So we have about $300,000 that's sitting not involved in agriculture in any way that we can use for retirement. That makes it much, much easier to do a succession plan, because most farmers have all of their eggs in that farm. They have no other money anywhere else. And so that means then if they're moving off the farm into Newton or into Des Moines or wherever they're going, that gets very difficult because there has to be a massive transfer of cash. Whereas that's why I say be profitable, so you don't need to take some money and put it off somewhere else away from the farm. So what will Alan and Kathleen receive? They're going to receive that house, or the house will get sold, I'm assuming, when we're dead and gone, if we're still living in it. So they're going to get the money from that. Plus, if we still have $100,000 in our, from whatever savings that we haven't used up yet, they will get that too. So whether it'll equal what these guys got, probably not, but equal and equitable in my mind aren't the same. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, you said starter.
Yes.
And it looked like there were many years where you figured things out, what the goals were. How long did all that?
Well, they came back 12 years ago. So we've been at this 12 years, and as I said in the last slide, we still have no formal agreement. We were basically at that formal agreement when Tira got sick, and we've never brought it back. But now that we've bought this house, we're going to be doing something fairly shortly. So they're going to be going into debt. But I think you need to start early. Like if you got kids, even when your kids are young, like if they're 15 years old, start talking. Well, do you want to farm? I don't believe forcing kids into farming right away when they're that young. But I think you need to start talking about it and telling them what your plans are, that in 20 years from now, we're going to have $500,000 stuck away in the bank somewhere, and we're going to move to wherever it is, South Texas, and put our feet up. And if you want to have the farm, well, you better have it figured out by 20 years from now, kind of a thing. You need to start having those kind of discussions with your kids.
So, but all of this time has basically been a good faith effort.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, we've both been farming away together, or sort of separate, but together. And, still today, if they want to go away for a week, I'm going to go and look after the sheep for them. And he's looking after my cows today. I'm not worried about him at all. So it's one way of doing it. There's as much creativity as you have in your brains is how you can do it. Don't assume this is the right way. I just share it as an example of how we have done it. And I believe it will work. It's not done yet. Who knows? We could have a major fight and it blows up too. I don't know. I hope it doesn't, but I guess it could. You never know. When you deal with people, it's, one of the other things that you need to plan for is that not everyone stays married. And that can cause huge, huge issues when you're doing farm succession. It can be the old couple doesn't stay married. It can be the young couple not staying married. And I don't know for sure how your tax laws down here work, but in Canada it can be quite devastating. Anything else? Yes?
I just wanted to add a comment. I really appreciated what you said about how it's okay not to talk every day or get along with your son on a day-to-day basis, but if you share those critical goals, that's fine. That really hit home for me. My brother moved back to my parents' ranch after college, and he and my dad butt heads on things every day. But they share, like deep down, they are in the same place, and so it works.
Yeah, I know lots of situations like that where, you know, when you went into the yard, you'd swear, boy, this isn't very good. But yet, they don't necessarily agree how to fix the cultivator, but they certainly are all agreeing on where we're heading, yeah. It's just human nature. Fathers and sons have interesting relationships. Probably mothers and daughters and fathers and daughters do too, but my only experience is going in businesses with a son, so I have no other thoughts. Anybody else? Well, thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that I shared something that could be useful to you into the future.